Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the PrepWell podcast. Today, I'm going to mix things up a little bit by giving you a pop quiz. I'm going to ask 10 multiple-choice questions that test your knowledge on college admissions. And I'd like you to answer those questions to the best of your ability and see how you do. And my guess is that many of you who are listening right now may be driving or folding laundry or sitting on a train. So I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible to take this test while you're doing other stuff. So I've kept it to only 10 questions, which will make it really easy to get a score. And because of the breadth of our listening audience, results on this test, I'm sure, will vary. We have a lot of listeners who have middle schoolers who are just beginning their journey. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have veteran PrepWellers who are practically experts themselves by now and have had several children go through PrepWell Academy, and some of them have listened to every single podcast. And plenty of students and parents are somewhere in between. So for this reason, some of the questions may be super easy for some of you and not particularly easy for others. Some of the questions may be subjective. Some of them you may not even agree with my answer. And that's okay too. Either way, I think this is going to be a good opportunity for you to check in on how educated you are right now on this very important topic. So let's start with question number 1. True or false? These days, when it comes to the SAT and ACT, almost all colleges have gone test optional, which means you don't have to submit a score if you don't want to, and many are moving to test blind, which means there's no place to even report a score if you wanted to. So with that in mind, it's not that important anymore to study and perform well on the SAT or ACT. True or false? The answer is false. Yes, test optional policies are widespread, but preparing for and excelling on an SAT or ACT will still give you an advantage over a student who chooses not to submit a score. No matter how many times the colleges say that it doesn't affect their decision making, it does. Question number 2. What is merit-based financial aid? What is merit-based financial aid? A. Merit-based aid is similar to need-based aid, where colleges award you scholarship money if your financial situation demonstrates a need. Answer B. Merit-based aid is typically awarded to students based on strong academic performance and SAT and ACT scores. Choice C. Merit-based aid is awarded once you attend a particular college if you achieve certain academic milestones. For example, maintaining a 3.5 GPA or better. And the last choice is D. Merit-based aid is most often awarded by Ivy League schools because of their sizable endowments. Okay, what's your answer? A, B, C, or D? The answer is B. Merit-based financial aid is typically awarded to students based on strong academic performance and SAT or ACT scores. In fact, merit-based awards are used most often by slightly lower tier colleges and universities to entice students who might otherwise go to the Ivy League but don't want to pay Ivy League prices. And these awards can be up to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year. And as an aside, Ivy League schools do not offer any merit-based aid. Question number 3. Does my child have to max out AP classes to be competitive at very selective colleges? Choice A, yes. These days, anything short of that, and they will be uncompetitive. Choice B, yes. And if they don't have many AP classes available at their school, students wanting to remain competitive will take AP classes online. Choice C, it depends on the rest of their profile. And choice D, no, many of the most competitive private schools are doing away with AP classes anyway, so don't worry about it. Answer: C, it depends on the rest of their profile. If AP classes aren't available in a particular student's high school, they are not penalized for that, theoretically at least. And remember, highly recruited athletes are not typically expected to take quite as many AP classes as non-athletes. And there certainly are other profiles that can probably get away without maxing out every available AP class. So it depends. Question number 4. My son just got a B in sophomore year chemistry. Does he still have any shot at the Ivies? Choice A, no. A B on a transcript in a core STEM class knocks most students out of the running for the Ivy League. Choice B, yes, as long as they never get another B in a core class. Choice C, yes, as long as they retake that class over the summer and get that B dropped from their transcript. Or D, yes, as long as the rest of their application is of Ivy League quality. The answer is D, yes. Even with a B in chemistry, your son still has a shot at getting in the Ivies. The answer was yes, as long as the rest of their application is of Ivy League quality. Plenty of Ivy League students had B's on their high school transcript. It will raise the eyebrow of an admissions officer, but it can certainly be overcome with other great things about the application. Question 5. Which is the most important year in your high school career? A, 8th grade, B, 9th grade, C, 10th grade, or D, 11th grade? Answer: C, 10th grade. In 9th grade, you're still pretty young and inexperienced, and you're given a little bit of room to operate, a little bit of room to find your footing. There's some forgiveness there if you waver a bit. 10th grade, on the other hand, is the transition period where you either figure out where you're going and how motivated you are and what your identity is and how much you want to push yourself, or you don't. If and when you figure yourself out sometime in 10th grade, then 11th grade is your proving grounds. 11th grade is when you prove to the world that you can deliver on that conviction. If you don't figure it out by 10th grade, 11th grade is going to be too overwhelming and you're going to run out of time. 10th grade is the magic grade. Question number 6. How much, generally speaking, does college cost per year? We're talking full freight, room, board, and tuition. And I'm going to go back and forth between in-state public universities and small private liberal arts schools. So you figure out which combination is the correct one or is the most correct. Choice A, in-state public university, $12,000 a year. Small private liberal arts school, $30,000 a year. Choice B, in-state public, $20,000 a year. Small private liberal arts, $50,000 a year. Choice C, in-state public university, $40,000 a year. Small private liberal arts, $85,000 a year. And last choice, choice D, in-state public university, $60,000 a year. small private liberal arts college $110,000 a year? Answer: C. In-state public universities about $40,000 a year, and small private liberal arts schools about $85,000 a year. Now, as I said, this is a generalization. There are plenty of examples of schools that are less, and even a few that are more expensive, but generally speaking, this is what you're up against, especially if you don't qualify for need-based aid. Those of you who have kids in college, this is nothing new, but those of you with middle schoolers better buckle up, because who knows what the cost is going to be in 4, 5, or 6 years. And while we're on the topic of money, let's go to question number 7. At what levels of current income should you not expect to receive any need-based financial aid? I'm going to repeat that. At what levels of current income should you not expect to receive any need-based financial aid? Now, there could be more than one answer here. In other words, at what income levels should you expect to pay nearly full freight for college? Again, there could be more than one answer here. Answer A, $50,000 a year in income. B, $100,000 a year. C, $150,000 a year. D, $200,000 a year. Or E, if you're making $500,000 a year or more in current income. How many of those choices should you not expect to get any need-based financial aid? The answer: C, D, and E. Generally speaking, if you make W-2 current income of more than about $150,000 a year, you should not expect to get very much in the way of need-based financial aid. Now, you might be wondering, how can you be expected to pay upwards of $85,000 a year for college, like we just talked about, if you're only making $150,000 to $175,000 a year? And you'd be right for wondering. Unfortunately, there is no answer. That's just the way the rules go. Let's move on to question number 8. In which sports are athletes offered full-ride athletic scholarships? That is, the college pays 100% of room, board, tuition for every player on the roster. These sports are also known as head count sports, as opposed to equivalency sports, which are different. So, choice A: men's football, men's basketball, men's baseball, women's crew, women's squash, and women's gymnastics. So the question is, are all of these sports head count sports, which are full scholarship sports? Choice B: men's football, men's basketball, men's crew, women's golf, women's soccer, and women's field hockey. Let's go to choice C: men's football, men's lacrosse, and men's water polo, women's crew, women's squash, and women's gymnastics. And lastly, choice D: men's football and men's basketball, women's basketball, women's volleyball, women's tennis, and women's gymnastics. You have your answer? The answer is D, as in dog, men's football, men's basketball, women's volleyball, women's tennis, and women's gymnastics. These are the only sports where each player is assigned a full scholarship, one scholarship per player. There are other sports that offer partial scholarships, known as equivalency sports, and sometimes those partial scholarships can get pretty close to full scholarship levels for some players, but that would be very rare. In most cases, those sports get a pot of money, equivalent, quote unquote, to some number of full scholarships, and then the coaches decide how to divvy out that money to all of the players on the roster. Some players get a lot of that pie, others might not get any. Question number 9. At what point should your child be fully committed to becoming a Division I recruited athlete? Choice A, the end of 7th grade. Choice B, the end of 9th grade. Choice C, the end of 10th grade. Or choice D, the end of 11th grade. Answer: B, the end of 9th grade. If your child expects to have a legitimate shot of becoming a recruited Division I athlete, they should be committed to that goal by the end of 9th grade. By then, they will have been exposed for a whole year to how competitive their sport is at their high school and how they fared. If they are not already performing at a varsity level, or they're not projecting to be a high-impact player by their sophomore year, then it's probably not going to happen. And yes, there are certainly some differences and nuances depending on the sport and the gender, but by and large, this is a good rule of thumb. And there's a pretty easy way to gauge whether or not your child has the mindset to make this happen. Ask them the following question: do you want to play at the Division I level in college? And if their answer is, yeah, I guess so, if I get recruited, then you have your answer, and the answer is no, it's not going to happen. And final question, question number 10. How many hours of volunteer work is enough to impress the most highly selective colleges? Choice A, 100 hours per year. It's about 2 hours per week, as long as the work is done in an area of interest or connected to your intended major. Choice B, 200 plus hours per year. It's about 4 hours per week. That's the minimum threshold at the most highly selective colleges, including the Ivies. Choice C, between 75 to 150 hours per year, as long as 50% of the hours were spent fundraising or in some other kind of cold calling role. Lastly, choice D, volunteer work does not, on its own, impress admissions officers more than any other activity. Admissions officers want to see how you spend your time. If you can prove that your volunteer hours had a purpose, other than just checking off a box, then you'll get credit for those hours. If you're doing it because you think colleges have some quota in mind, or that you'll get some disproportionate credit for volunteering, you'd be wrong, and you'd likely have wasted a lot of unnecessary time. Answer, you probably figured this one out by now, is D. Volunteer work does not on its own impress admissions officers more than any other activity, sports, piano, whatever it might be. Admissions officers care about how you spend your time, what you value. And if you can prove that those hours of volunteer work have a purpose, and you weren't just randomly checking off a box or trying to get some number of hundreds of hours, then you'll get some credit. But if you're doing it only because there's a quota and there's no other reason and it's totally disconnected, you're not going to get much credit. All right, that's the end of the quiz. Tally up those numbers. It's out of 10. The math should be pretty easy, even if you're driving. How did you do? Let me know in the comments. Any hundreds out there? I know there are a few. How about some 90s, 80s, 70s? Anybody dip down to the 60s or below? If you've made it this far, you all get A's for effort. And I really appreciate you spending the time to test out your knowledge. Obviously, I had some fun with these questions, and some of the answers, of course, are not as black and white as others, but they do touch on many hot topics that I hear from parents and students all the time. And if answers to some of these questions threw you for a loop, stay engaged. Keep listening to this podcast. Go back and check in with previous episodes. Set up a consulting call with me, and we'll hash out any of these questions and any other burning questions that you might have one-on-one. And of course, if you're not a PrepWeller yet, or your son or daughter is not a PrepWeller yet, enroll them. Get in the mix. Every week in my video lessons, I go over topics like this and hundreds of others, starting in 9th grade. to make sure that you aren't led astray, you're not wasting time, and you're not finding yourself way behind the 8 ball when it's too late to recover. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the continued support. If you know a parent with a 6th, 7th, 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, or 11th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share the episode with them. You can do that by finding that small box with the tiny arrow pointing up. That's the share button. Click that button, text your friends a link to this episode, maybe even put a little personal note from you recommending that they give it a listen. If you have questions, comments, or an idea for an upcoming episode, please reach out to me by email, DM me on Instagram, check out our blog, Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. Until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.